Okay, let's see. Chapter 21. Apollo, Nature, and Deeds. Apollo, Zeus's son by Leto, was a 7 months child, but gods grow up swiftly. Themis fed him on nectar and ambrosia, and when the fourth day dawned, he called for bow and arrows, with which Hephaestus at once provided him. On leaving Delos, he made straight for Mount Parnassus, where the serpent Python, his mother's enemy, was lurking, and wounded him severely with arrows. Python fled to the oracle of Mother Earth at Delphi, a city so named in honor of the monster Delphine, his mate. But Apollo dared follow him into the shrine, and there dispatched him beside the sacred chasm. B. Mother Earth reported this outrage to Zeus, who not only ordered Apollo to visit Tempe for purification, but instituted the Pythian Games in honor of Python, over which he was to preside penitently. Quite unabashed, Apollo disregarded Zeus's command to visit Tempe. Instead, he went to Agalaia for purification, accompanied by Artemis, and then, disliking the place, sailed to Tara in Crete, where King Carmanor performed the ceremony. C. On his return to Greece, Apollo sought out Pan, the disreputable old goat-legged Arcadian god, and having coaxed him to reveal the art of prophecy, seized the Delphitic oracle and retained its priestess, called the Pythoness, in his own service. D. Leto, on hearing the news, came with Artemis to Delphi, where she turned aside to perform some private rite in a sacred grove. The giant Titus interrupted her devotions and was trying to violate her when Apollo and Artemis, hearing screams, ran up and killed him with a volley of arrows, a vengeance which Zeus, Tityus's father, was pleased to consider a pious one. In Tartarus, Tityus was stretched out for torment, his arms and legs securely pegged to the ground, the area covered with no less than 9 acres, and 2 vultures ate his liver. E. Next, Apollo killed the satyr Marsyas, a follower of the goddess Sibyl. This was how it came about. One day, Athene made a double flute from a stag's bones and played on it at a banquet of the gods. She could not understand at first why Hera and Aphrodite were laughing silently behind their hands, although her music seemed to delight the other deities. She therefore went away by herself into the Phrygian wood, took up the flute again beside a stream, and watched her image in the water as she played. Realizing at once how ludicrous that bluish face and those swollen cheeks made her look, she threw down the flute and laid a curse on anyone who picked it up. F. Marsyas was the innocent victim of this curse. He stumbled upon the flute, which he had no sooner put to his lips than it played of itself, inspired by the memory of Athene's music, and he went about to Phrygia in Sibyl's train, delighting the ignorant peasants. They cried out that Apollo himself could not have made better music, even on his lyre, and Marsyas was foolish enough not to contradict them. This, of course, provoked the anger of Apollo, who invited him to a contest, the winner of which should inflict whatever punishment he pleased on the loser. Marsyas consented, and Apollo impaneled the Muses as a jury. The contest proved an equal one, the Muses being charmed by both instruments, until Apollo cried out to Marsyas, "I challenge you to do with your instrument as much as I can do with mine. Turn it upside down and both play and sing at the same time." G. This with a flute was manifestly impossible, for Marsyas failed to meet the challenge, but Apollo reversed his lyre and sang such delightful hymns in honor of the Olympian gods that the Muses could not do less than give the verdict in his favor. Then, for all his pretended sweetness, Apollo took a most cruel revenge on Marsyas, flaying him alive and nailing his skin to a pine, or some say to a a plane tree near the source of the river which now bears his name. H. Afterwards, Apollo won a second musical contest at which King Midas presided. This time he beat Pan, becoming the acknowledged god of music. He has ever since played on his 7-string lyre while the gods banquet. Another of his duties was once to guard the herds and flocks which the gods kept in Pyrrha, but he later delegated this task to Hermes. I. Though Apollo refuses to bind himself in marriage, he has got many nymphs and mortal women with child. Among them, Phaeacia, on whom he fathered Doris and his brothers, and Thalia, the muse, on whom he fathered the Corybantes, and Coronis, on whom he fathered Asclepius, and Aria, on whom he fathered Miletus, and Serene, on whom he fathered Aristeus. J. He also seduced the nymph Dryope, whom was tending her father's flocks on Mount Ortia in the company of her friends, and the Hamadryds. Apollo disguised himself as a tortoise, with which they all played, and when Dryope put him into her bosom, he turned into a hissing serpent, scared away by Hamadryds, and enjoyed her. She bore him Amphictyus, who founded the city of Otea, and built a temple to his father. There, Dryope served as priestesses until one day the Hamadryds stole her away and left a poplar in her place. K. Apollo was not invariably successful in love. On one occasion, he tried to steal Marpessa from Idas, but she remained true to her husband. On another, he pursued Daphne, the mountain nymph, a priestess of Mother Earth, daughter of the river Peneus in Thessaly. But when he overtook her, she cried out to Mother Earth, who in the nick of time spirited her away to Crete, where she became known as Pasiphae. Mother Earth left a laurel tree in her place, and from its leaves Apollo made a wreath to console himself. L. His attempt on Daphne, it must be added, was no sudden impulse. He had long been in love with her and had brought about the death of his rival, Leucippus, son of Oenomus, who disguised himself as a girl and joined Daphne's mountain revels. Apollo, knowing of this by divination, advised the mountain nymphs to bathe naked and thus make sure that everyone in their company was a woman. Leucippus's impostor was at once discovered, and the nymphs tore him to pieces. M. There was also the case of the beautiful youth Hyacinthus, a Spartan prince, with whom not only the poet Thamyris fell in love, the first man who ever wooed one of his own sex, but Apollo himself, the first god to do so. Apollo did not find Thamyris a serious rival. Having overheard his boast that he could surpass the Muses in song, he maliciously reported it to them, and they at once robbed Thamyris of his sight, his voice, and his memory for harping. But the west wind had also taken a fancy to Hyacinthus and became insanely jealous of Apollo, who was one day teaching the boy how to hurl a discus. When the west wind caught it in midair, dashed it against Hyacinthus's skull and killed him. From his blood sprang the hyacinth flower on which his initial letters are still to be traced. N. Apollo's earned Zeus's anger only once after the famous conspiracy to dethrone him. This was when his son Asclepius the physician had the temerity to resurrect a dead man and thus rob Hades of a subject. Hades naturally lodged a complaint on Olympus. Zeus killed Asclepius with a thunderbolt, and Apollo, in revenge, killed the Cyclops. Zeus was enraged at the loss of his armorers and would have banished Apollo to Tartarus forever had not Leto pleaded for his forgiveness and undertaken that he would mend his ways. The sentence was reduced to 1 year's hard labor, which Apollo was to serve in the sheep's fold of King Artemis of Thera. Obeying Leto's advice, Apollo not only carried out the sentence humbly, but conferred great benefits on Admetus. Having learned his lesson, he therefore preached moderation in all things. The phrases "know thyself" and "nothing in excess" were always on his lips. He brought the Muses down from their home on Mount Helicon to Delphi, tamed their wild frenzy, and led them in formal and decorous dances. Footers. 1. Apollo's history is a confusing one. The Greeks made him the son of Leto, a goddess known as Lat in southern Palestine, but he was also a god of the Hyperboreans, beyond the north wind men, whom Hecataeus clearly identified with the British, though Pindar regarded them as Libyans. Delos was the center of this Hyperborean cult, which it seems extended southeastward to Nabata and Palestine, northwestward to Britain, and included Athens. Visits were constantly exchanged between the states united in this cult. 2. Apollo, among the Hyperboreans, sacrificed hecatombs of asses, which identifies him with the child Horus, whose defeat of his enemy Set the Egyptians annually celebrated by driving wild asses over a precipice. Horus was avenging Set's murder of his father Osiris, the sacred king, beloved of the triple moon goddess Isis, or Lat, whom his Tentus sacrificed at midsummer and midwinter, and of whom Horus was himself the reincarnation. The myth of Leto's pursuit of Python corresponds with the myth of Isis's pursuit by Set during the 72 hottest days of the year. Moreover, Python is identified with Typhon, the Greek Set, in the Homeric hymn to Apollo, and by the scholiast on Apollonius's Rhodeus. The Hyperborean Apollo is, in fact, a Greek Horus. 3. But the myth has been given a political turn. Python is said to have been sent against Leto by Hera, who had borne him parthenogenically to spite Zeus. And Apollo, after killing Python and presumably also his mate Delphine, seizes the oracular shrine of Mother Earth at Delphi, for Hera was Mother Earth, or Delphine, in her prophetic aspect. It seems that certain northern Hellenes, allied with Thraco-Libyans, invaded central Greece and the Peloponnese, where they were opposed by the pre-Hellenic worshippers of the earth goddesses, but captured her chief oracular shrines. At Delphi, they destroyed the sacred oracular serpent. A similar serpent was kept in the Erechtheum at Athens, and took over the oracle in the name of their god Apollo Smintheus. Mousy, like Esmon, the Canaanite god of healing, had a curative mouse for his emblem. The invaders agreed to identify him with Apollo, the Hyperborean Horus, worshipped by their allies. To placate local opinion at Delphi, regular funeral games were instituted in honor of the dead hero Python, and his priestess was retained in office. 4. The moon goddess Brizo, soother of Delos, indistinguishable from Leto, may be identified with the Hyperborean triple goddess Brigit, who became Christianized as Saint Brigit or Saint Bride. Brigit was patroness of all the arts, and Apollo followed her example. The attempt on Leto by the giant Tityus suggests an abortive rising by the mountaineers of Phocis against the invaders. 5. Apollo's victories over Marsyas and Pan commemorate the Hellenic conquest of Phrygia and Arcadia and the consequent supersession in those regions of wind instruments by stringed ones, except among the peasantry. Messiah's punishment may refer to the ritual flaying of a sacred king, as Athene stripped Pallas of his magical aegis, or the removal of the entire bark from an alder shoot to make a shepherd's pipe, the alder being personified as a god or demigod. Apollo was claimed as an ancestor of the Dorian Greeks and of the Milesians, who paid him special honors. The Corybantes, dancers at the winter solstice festival, were called his children by Thalia the Muse because he was god of music. 6. His pursuit of Daphne, the mountain nymph, daughter of the river Peneus and priestess of Mother Earth, refers apparently to the Hellenic capture of Tempe, where the goddess Daphne, Bloody One, was worshipped by a collage of orgiastic laurel-chewing Menades. After suppressing the college, Plutarch's account suggests that the priestess fled to Crete, where the moon goddess was called Persephone. Apollo took over the laurel, which afterwards only the Pythoness might chew. Daphne will have been mare-headed at Tempe as at Phagalia. Leucippus, White Horse, was the sacred king of the local horse cult, annually torn in pieces by the wild women, who bathed after his murder to purify themselves, not before. 7. Apollo's seduction of Dryope on Ota perhaps records the local suppression of an oak cult by a cult of Apollo to whom the poplar was sacred, as does his seduction of Aria. His tortoise disguise is a reference to the lyre he had bought from Hermes. Pythia's name suggests that she was an autonomous aspect of the goddess. The unsuccessful attempt on Marpessa Snatcher seems to record Apollo's failure to seize a Mezzanian shrine that on the grain goddess as Sow. Apollo's servitude to Admetus of Pherae may recall a historical event, the humiliation of the Apollonian priesthood in punishment for their massacre of a pre-Hellenic smith guild which had enjoyed Zeus's protection. 8. The myth of Hyacinthus, which seems at first sight no more than a sentimental fable told to explain the mark on the Greek hyacinth, concerns the Cretan flower hero Hyacinthus, also apparently called Narcissus, whose worship was introduced into Mycenaean Greece and who named the later summer month of Hyacinthus in Crete, Rhodes, Kos, Thera, and at Sparta. Dorian Apollo usurped Hyacinthus' name at Tarentum, where he had a hero tomb, and at Amyclae, a Mycenaean city, another tomb of Hyacinthus. This became the foundation of Apollo's throne. Apollo was an immortal by this time. Hyacinthus reigned only for a season. His death by a discus recalls that of his nephew, Acrisius. Don't worry, only 9 more to go. 9. Coronis, Crow, mother of Asclepius by Apollo, was probably a title of Athene's, but the Athenians always denied that she had children and disguised the myth. 10. In classical times, music, poetry, philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and science came under Apollo's control. As the enemy of barbarism, he stood for moderation in all things, and the 7 strings of his lute were connected with the 7 vowels of the later Greek alphabet, given mystical significance and used for the therapeutic music. Finally, because of his identification with the child Horus, a solar concept, he was worshipped as the sun, whose Corinthian cult had been taken over by solar Zeus, and his sister Artemis was rightly identified with the moon. 11. Cicero, in his essay on the nature of the gods, makes Apollo, son of Leto, only the fourth of the ancient series. He distinguishes Apollo, son of Hephaestus, Apollo, the father of the Cretan Corybantis, and the Apollo who gave Arcadia its laws. 12. Apollo's killing of the Python is not, however, so simple a myth as at first appears, because the stone Omphalos on which the Pythoness sat was traditionally the tomb of the hero incarnate in the serpent, whose oracles she delivered. The Hellenic priest of Apollo usurped the functions of the sacred king, who legitimately and ceremonially had always killed his predecessor, the hero. This is proved by the Stepteria rite recorded in Plutarch's Why Oracles Are Silent. Every 9th year, a hut representing a king's dwelling was built on the threshing floor at Delphi, and a night attack suddenly made on it by... Here there is a gasp in the account. The table of... What? Whatever, dude. Don't tell me how to do that shit. Every 9th year, a hut representing a king's dwelling was built on the threshing floor at Delphi, and a night attack suddenly made on it by the table of first fruits was overturned, the hut set on fire, and the torchmen fled from the sanctuary without looking behind them. Afterwards, the youth who had taken part in the deed went to Tempe for purification, whence he returned in triumph, crowned and carrying a laurel branch. 13. The sudden concerted assault on the inmate of the hut recalls the mysterious murder of Romulus by his companions. It also recalls the yearly Baphonia sacrifice at Athens, when the priests who had killed the Zeus ox with a double axe fled without looking behind them, then ate the flesh at a communal feast, staged a mimic resurrection of the ox, and brought up the axe for trial on a charge of sacrilege. 14. At Delphi, as at Knossos, the sacred king must have reigned until the 9th year. The boy went to Tempe, doubtless because the Apollo cult had originated there. Shit, I usually go through and edit, like try to do that, but I'm not fucking doing that. No, I butchered the shit out of all those names, so they're just going to be however those subs do it. And hopefully the little summary fills you in on those names, because Jesus, that fucking was tough. Anyways, thanks.